Welcome to the Leading with Empathy podcast. My guest today is Barbi Clendining. Now, Barbi is the co-founder of Firefly HR, and they specialize in recruiting people for the out-of-school hours care, a pretty important sector that we don't think about all that often. But the thing that really struck me about this interview was just how open Barbi is to sharing the trials that she's been through to get where she is, the challenges she still faces with things like ADHD and other challenges that are going on, but how those experiences have really helped to shape how she's created her organization, how she goes about looking for the right types of people, and how to make sure that we're partnering our children up with these carers who absolutely deliver on empathy. So this is a fascinating discussion. You'll get a lot out of this. It's very broad, and Barbi is very open and generous with her time. So please enjoy Barbi Clendining. Welcome, Barbi. So good to see you.
Hi, thanks for having me, Daniel.
Oh, great pleasure. Look, maybe you just start off, tell us a little bit about what you do and how you got here.
Yep. And I just said to Daniel before starting, I'm terrible at doing this as well. But what I do is I run a recruitment agency with my husband. I joke that I talked for so long about the profession I was in, which was education and care, so early childhood education, out of school hours care, and primary teaching. Because I talked so much that he just, I guess by osmosis, absorbed the profession as well. So we decided to start that up after him doing a lot of listening. And we just like finding, I guess, great leaders in that space, the education and care space, or encouraging people that aren't sure what they want to do to that space. We see a lot of leaders come from that. And consulting and professional development as well, to kind of tie all in, to keep that all going. Yeah, I told you I'm
Yeah.
not my own stuff.
No, look, it's an important area. I know, the whole education space is struggling to get good people, struggling to have enough people, and it's such a fragile and important sort of time in people's lives when they're little kids, and particularly out of school hours care, when kids can feel quite vulnerable in those spaces. Why are you so passionate about this sort of space?
Yeah, so I guess for me, I have a bit of a different upbringing. I gave Daniel the full rundown, and then what comes out comes out. I'm pretty open on it all, but I had a different upbringing. I didn't really have parents around or safe adults around, I guess is the easiest way to say, and go through schooling. I don't remember going to preschool, early childhood education. Apparently I did, just don't remember. And in the primary years, I switched around schools a fair bit. Because I was always changing where I was living or who I was living with. But it was when I got to year 6, I had a year 6 teacher, new school. Again, I'm like, oh my gosh, here we go again. But they were incredible. Just the difference I felt as a child, because I was 10, 11 at the time, from them and what school then became for me, where it was a safe place to go, safe adults around. I'm not saying the teachers at the other places weren't, but just the difference they noticed, without being said, such as if I didn't have lunch, they would just make it appear. But it was never awkward or anything. I remember not having to worry about approaching the canteen for food, because I have no idea what they organised in the background, but these little things, huge difference. Mufti days, the gold coin donation schools still do this, but a child that never has that, you're just so nervous to not wear mufti because your friends will bag you out, B, not have the money because then the teachers go, where's the money? It sounds so little, but this is happening in children's world. But so going to a school that had uniforms available for me without having to ask, lunch available, so your basic needs, like when you go back to Maslow's hierarchy of needs, the bottom. It was a place where, and I guess going with your podcast line, that empathy, like where I was just like, wow, like I can't believe these people that don't know me, never met me before, just do this. So that led me at a pretty good time as well, in year 6, of about to go into year 7, starting high school, on a different trajectory. I was quite the naughty child before that. You name it, I did it. Probably, and in primary school, not even like before everyone got to high school. So it meant going into high school, I was pretty determined to be like that teacher, those teachers. Just that change they could make me feel. Um, it made a difference to your day. Like even if you dreaded going home or not safe at home, it was just still that place that gave you that respite. So went to high school determined to actually go, not wag as much. And then determined to go to university and become a teacher myself. So I feel like if that didn't happen right then, just the pivotal difference of how my life could have been a very different way. Um, I actually refused to live with my mum at that age too, 11 in year six. Again, just having safe adults around that show empathy and care, I kind of started to learn a bit more about my rights as a person. And that refusal to live with her at that age was like one of the best decisions I could make at that time. So yeah, all of it, little knock-ons. Um, and because I became a teacher, I actually got to teach for that teacher when she was a principal later. Um, and she didn't remember, not in the sense she didn't remember me, but she didn't remember all the stuff she did because it was
Mm.
just what she does. Like it was just natural. She only retired last year too. But yeah, so a big, big difference in my world just from little actions and I guess thinking about others and their emotions.
Yeah, and I think that's one thing we sometimes forget. I work with lots of different industries. Just last week, I was with the School Administrators Association in New South Wales. Before that, the Queensland School Business Managers, and speaking at their conferences. And again, these are people who have so much influence over children's lives with the decisions they make, the way in which they interact with them, the understanding and care, and you're right. Sometimes it's those little moments, isn't it, that
Mm.
can have a huge impact. Yes, you sort of talked about it a little bit with um, the different sort of giving you food or allowing you to sort of engage. But I guess it's hard sometimes for people to understand what it feels like. What does it feel like, I guess, when you're in a situation when you're already feeling vulnerable, you don't know where to turn,
Mm.
and then you're stepping into an environment like a schoolyard, which can be pretty ruthless at times. To talk us through, well, what does that feel like? What is that experience like?
Yeah, I wrote down two words actually as you were talking. You matter. I guess that type of experience of you matter.
Mm.
Um, because then also worked in education myself for 20 years. I've worked with a lot of teachers, educators, now leaders, or led a lot of leaders. And it's not we're all naive, it's just we all have different experiences. I just happen to have a lot of experiences, so I was pretty aware of the kind of unspoken that you could pick up quite easily on how a child felt. And it's not even I'm gonna say this as a busy parent myself, I've got 2 children under 5. It doesn't even always mean there's anything wrong, it's more that I'm running my own business, 2 children under 5, how much I have to rush them sometimes, feel bad, but then on the other end, they could be getting into their care environment just feeling down or not heard that day, just because I might have a meeting. Um, sorry, kids. So there's not always something wrong in the home environment, but there's just those situations where their emotions, their like cognitive development still forming that just having an educator or a leader just picking up on that child's mood in that moment and being that kind of they all develop relationships with different children, but even I mean different adults, but developing those relationships, just being even aware of like, hey, do you want to sit down and read a book? Um, and I smile because as I'm saying this about children, I found when working and leading with adults, so much was very similar. I don't know why I laugh about it, but it makes perfect sense. Sometimes they just want you not to sit down and read them a book, but basically the same type of premise, like there could be nothing normally out of whack in their world, but it's just that day something's happened and they're just a bit different. They might need a different approach to what they do or what they do in the workplace even,
Mm.
or just a minute. Um, um,
Yeah, it's an interesting one. A friend of mine, Nigel Risner, once said that children spell love Time.
yeah.
It's that time we take with them, and like you, I had some good struggles during my childhood, but as a parent now and running a business and traveling a lot, having that sense that do I give enough time? Is it the quality time? I'd love your thoughts around, what's we all have to try and balance these things. What are some of the ways that you try and, I guess, get that balance, or when you feel like it goes astray, which it always does for us? Well,
Yeah.
what are some of the things you do to sort of compensate or try and remedy that in your mind?
I laugh because I'm pretty open. I have ADHD, but only diagnosed 2 years ago. Makes a lot of sense. After the second child, I think the disorganization came out, but I don't have that balance. That's why I laughed when you said that. I tend to go, I have the inattentive type, whereas I go more all in on whatever random facet I'm going to focus on for then, or start 20 different things at once and not finish them all. And the thing, I guess it's especially in the last 2 years, it's almost like the diagnosis helps click of why I might do certain things, but then work on changing them is boundaries. I have zero boundaries. And I don't know if ADHD and like overly empathetic is linked, but people pleasing is quite common with ADHD. And it's like where that line might be with being overly empathetic to people pleasing. I don't know if you've like explored that, but I know for me, just over the last 2 years, like being really aware of that, because I've definitely been the people pleaser, but I've enjoyed it. I loved helping people, I love supporting people. But now I'm in a point in my life where I'm older. Everything's harder. I'm 40 next year, and it's like each year it's like, oh wow. So just that time and energy you maybe gave people that you once could, plus that on the two kids, that I can't do as much. So that's probably why I was saying like that boundaries thing that I don't think I even needed to care about in my 20s. Because I had that time. I had that energy. I don't have that now. So it's learning to pull back on the taking in on everyone else's things.
Yeah.
And don't forget yourself.
But and it's a really, I'd love to talk about that more, this idea of the people pleasing. So it's a common challenge that I see, particularly when I work with educators, to be honest. It's I don't want to be sounding stereotypical here, but the conference I spoke at there was 500 people attending, 497 of them I think were women,
Yeah.
and they're very caring, they're very loving, they're very willing to help anyone, but sometimes at their detriment. Talk to me about how you sort of are seeing, or I guess experiencing some of those challenges now of how people pleasing, can become a bit of a challenge or a problem for you.
Yeah, so I know I just said then, like when I was younger, it was easier, but it's like you forget sometimes. As a leader, like I was a leader at the same place for 10 years. And I think it was about 6 years in where the burnout just boom. Like it was like I suddenly had in a 6 month span all these health issues pop up. Always felt fine, probably the undiagnosed ADHD why I could always just do a lot. But I had like a benign tumor pop up in my leg, which I now have to monitor. From the dentist visits, actually the one thing that made me notice it the most between the 6 months checkup, I had cracked 6 teeth, and she thought it was probably grinding, which because I'd been seeing the same dentist for a while, never had happened before.
Mhm.
So she flagged that to then go for a sleep apnea test, which then flagged it's probably stress. Infertility issues, probably linked to the burnout and stress too I had at the time, which working with children is not the greatest. I'm very proud I've got two now, so happy to discuss all that. So I guess it's like that burnout that just hits. There's more things, and it's like I'm forgetting, but individually, like a benign tumor in my leg, I wouldn't even think that has to do with burnout. But the doctor's saying, like, yeah, your body's just kind of screaming at you right now to just
Mm.
slow down. And not just a holiday, like a week off, because that doesn't fix anything. Maybe in the moment, but it doesn't fix anything long term. And a lot of that probably came with overly people pleasing, overly trying to do, like if I only had to achieve this in my head, it was like, okay, I'm going to achieve this. And it wasn't because I had high standards, it was because you want to please the other person and go above and beyond. I found like there was a bit of a difference. Like it's one thing if I want to do it overly for me, and I guess that got blurred. This is my ADHD kicking in of what was the original question again.
No, but it's a really interesting point because a couple of things that sort of stuck out for me. One, we have to recognize that stress causes a physiological response in our body, right? So a small amount of stress, short-term stress, short period of stress is actually quite beneficial. Immune system goes higher. We get very good at responding and being able to do things very sharply. The problem is when that's a prolonged period, it basically exhausts our resources, and you get some of those things you described. Again, if we're not filling up ourselves, we're not supporting ourselves, we become unable to support others.
Yeah, and oh, sorry,
No, go.
The original question was that I noticed that burnout in the profession is a big reason why there's a lot of leaders, especially leaving. They can be quite passionate. They got into the role on purpose because they wanted to work with children, make a difference, and then suddenly you take on a leadership role. You're still doing that core, providing quality to children, but then now you're also leading others and adults. And just that knock on of especially being overly empathetic, I shouldn't say overly empathetic, but empathetic. People that go into this profession tend to be. That's why they pick this profession in the first place. We see it a lot out there. And then we also see a lot of burnout out there, the above and beyond, the probably the boundaries, which again, I'm still learning on that side. And a lot of us probably know it, that say it's the old adage of like, you can't help someone else if you don't help yourself first. But actually doing that is a different thing.
Yeah. And look, I think thinking about it, my childhood, I was always in that search for someone to look after me, to like me, to feel like you're worthy or
Yeah.
recognized in someone else's eyes, and therefore trying really hard to do things to make other people feel good. And I think is that similar to your experience, that that going through those challenges in your childhood, and I'm certainly sure that mine would paling in insignificance, but I think it happens to a lot of people, right? We have this desire to please people so they will appreciate us, they will care about us, or support us. The challenge, I think, is when we shift into leadership, that becomes one, very hard to do, almost untenable. But also it doesn't necessarily help them. Have you seen your parenting style, I guess, or the way you sort of worked with kids change over time from wanting to do for to some other methodology?
Yes. I again smile at that because what I know is not what I do in the parenting sense. As an educator, I am the opposite. As a parent, I'm a helicopter parent. I'm one of those parents I probably went, oh my gosh. I'm also the parent that forgets to fill in all the forms. Sorry to any of the kids' centers. Our oldest is going to school next year, and I had the school email again because I haven't completed the enrollment. Whereas I would be like, what are you doing, parents? And then on the other side, I was very laid back as an educator. I felt like I was more in tune, but I was at work. Like I felt like I had the time for that to be more in tune with our kids, like the example before. And you mentioned it too, time, but like then having to rush them out the door, or today my oldest didn't want to go to school. She does that every day, but then having to have those conversations, like she feels like to her that's a huge thing in her whole world. Like that will make her morning knock on not great because she's just spent 20 minutes refusing to put her shoes on. Like, and that's not a big thing. Like that's, and you said it before, like the experiences for that child is just that child's experience. So for her, she's actually had a bad day because I made her put her shoes on. But that's how she feels. But then it's on the other end for an educator to have that. Whereas in a service, I would have more time because I'm at work to sit with that child. If they don't want to put their shoes on for the next 2 hours, that's fine. Like that's difference I've noticed as a parent. As a parent, you want to make your kid eat vegetables. As an educator, sure, we have food, but it's not at my forefront that my kid hasn't eaten any vegetables or meat all week. Our oldest is anemic too, but I reckon it's that because I'm more on her as a parent being like, come on, eat your parent vegetables, she goes the opposite, the rebellious of, no. It's not like, we call it the white food diet, like pasta, white bread, chicken nuggets. It's quite common, and I know that as an educator that's quite common, but as the parent, it's like the frustration's a bit different, because you want her, obviously anemic can cause behavioral issues, tiredness and all that. Like, I don't want that for her. As an educator, it's more, I guess, you're on the social emotional development side. Can be a bit on the physical health, but again, I guess that lies a lot with the parents, in how they sleep and what they feed them and everything like that. I don't know if that helps at all paint that picture, but I definitely thought so much of it since becoming a parent, because I don't have parents, or my mum was psychotic, so called me Barbie because she didn't realize I was real, kept disappearing, coming and going. But it was like that since I was born, so I don't know any different. So
Yeah.
that's why it's fine for me to talk about. Yeah, so that's why on the parenting side, I'm probably a bit over the top on that. I hope she listens to this one day and I'm like, sorry, Haley.
I'm
Love you.
sure. I'm sure she'll be proud of it. I mean,
Oh,
but it is look, I think it's important as a business leader and for us as business leaders to talk about these things. As we were speaking before, I was looking over here because my phone had messaged my daughter had gone to book week. She'd been in the parade. She'd not had fun about something.
yeah.
My wife was there. She was losing her shit, which, as you know, kids can do pretty easily, and wanted to come home. We're both working. All of these juggles, I guess, are really important for us to talk about because they're
Mm,
not the ideal person on LinkedIn or Facebook who's got it all sorted is actually just a big hunk of bullshit most
yeah.
of the time. And it is important that we talk about those challenges and those struggles, particularly for this discussion around empathy, because empathy, I think, is one of those things that gets mixed up and moved around and thought of in different ways. I wonder how do you think of empathy, or what's your sort of definition when you think of the word?
Yeah, and then because that was one of the questions you sent through when I actually went to write it, because I feel like we talk about it a lot, especially in a recruitment sense. Like, it's kind of one of our markers, like, how responsive is this person? Can we see them being empathetic towards others, whether at the same level, lower their leadership, above, like, just all these different things. But then actually being like, oh, what is a definition of it? And then so then I went looking, and I have to admit, for some of the like more straighty 180 responses, I'm like, oh, that's not, but then like it's more probably the fluffy, I would say, fluffy definitions that I feel more probably connecting with. Like, what did I put here? So the more straight 180 was the ability to understand and share the feelings of another. I'm like, whereas the more airy fairy, because this is from an emotion researcher, so
Yeah.
probably why I like it better. Generally define empathy as the ability to sense other people's emotions, coupled with the ability to imagine what someone else might be thinking or feeling. And that second half there is what I do too much. I blame the ADHD, but that definitely, like, for me, relates a lot on the empathy side, and a definition of how I see it and how I feel it, because I guess we all might feel it differently.
Yeah, it's a really interesting part to dive into because there are sort of clinical definitions.
Mm.
There's also separation that is often made between what they'd call cognitive empathy. So I can understand what's driving you, what's going on for you. Emotional empathy, I can really relate to those emotions. Then there's things like somatic empathy, right? Which is I get, I feel your feelings.
Yeah.
And I think from an educator's perspective, that's a really interesting balance because um, I probably want an educator to understand what's going on. I probably want them to be able to identify the emotional states pretty
Yeah.
effectively. But if my child is incredibly sad and upset, I don't necessarily want them to become overwhelmingly upset and afraid and fall into the same emotions, right? And is that something that you ever sort of wrestle with, this sort of how much does that person's state overcome you?
Yeah. Yeah, and I've seen it as a leader too with other educators. And it doesn't matter how much experience, I've seen it at all different levels, from like someone brand new to the profession. to someone been working in 20 years. There's all different things that can, I guess it can also maybe sometimes a different trigger for everyone. Depends what the emotional state, like what caused it for the child, to what might then trigger off someone else. And I guess in a leadership sense, regardless profession, that's kind of being aware. I was going to say empathetic. No, I think awareness is the thing of triggers are different for everyone. Like I don't have a lot of memories myself from under 11, but especially since having children like nearly 5 years ago, I just get random, it's not even the memory, but a feeling of a memory. And the triggers, I have no idea what they're going to be. Like they're really odd. It could be like a plant or something, or a house looks familiar, but it's not, and it just sets off this weird thing. But if I was leading the team at the time when that happened, like if it happened to me in the service or in the workplace or now in our own business, just how you might be emotionally can be so different. You might be a bit more short as a leader, but more so because there's a lot going on in here. Being aware of that as well for your team.
Yeah.
That, because I was overly empathetic, but if you're in your own little cycle, because something may just happen. I mean, even just most people seem to understand or have like death kind of is a experience we all unfortunately experience, but that type of emotion we seem to understand, like, okay, they need their space, they need their time, but then everything else, if it's not relatable to us or it may not bother us at all, we may not be really as in tune as death. Feel bad using that example, but it was the one thing I thought that everyone might have more in common than other things out there. So
And I think it's an interesting path to go down because, if you are leading a team and a certain piece of stimulus, and I don't know, it could be anything from something doesn't work, there's a failure, or we don't meet our targets, right through to something, we hear of an accident outside, or we hear, for example, there might have been a car accident in the street outside of our workplace. You might go, okay, well, that's terrible, but accidents happen. Or, yeah, we missed our targets. No big deal. We're just going to roll with this. We'll be fine. If someone in your team responds very different or reacts very differently to that situation, what we tend to do, what I tend to find, is we start to make up a story as to why that is. Oh, that person, they missed their targets. They're really upset. They might be just a bit soft, or maybe they were overly invested in the targets, or maybe we sort of pick one reason and then go, well, we'll label them with that. And I think this is where empathy can get really tricky because, again, people who think very quickly and have this sort of want to help people can often jump too quickly to solutions. Is that ever something that you found? You sort of rush in to help with your assumptions about what's going on first,
and solve all the problems too, and they don't need it necessarily. And it's like with a child, you might just sit with them and not solve all their problems. I mean, unless they're hungry, that's an easy one. But like everything else, like if they don't want to be at school, you can't do anything. Like as an educator, but you actually just sit with them, and whether it's not a purposeful distraction, but something on what they want to do, Lego. I feel like every workplace should have Lego, actually, like a Lego room or a Lego table where anyone can go sit when they just need it, because the amount of conversations that can come out when people are, because it's like they're busy with their hands, but it's not an overly, well, actually, I don't know, the Lego I was building on the weekend, I was going to say it's not overly using your brain, but sometimes it is. And those things have sometimes come out, but they want to share that in the moment. I know I use Lego as an example, but I'm thinking of adults too, or others in your team. And then sometimes, especially if it's because I know a lot of issues in the workplace is miscommunication. If they happen to be feeling a bit off, or even yourself as a leader, it's sometimes learning more about that in a non-like threatening way. Lego, that there's a good non-threatening way of finding out more. It can just be like, oh, like to cross wires.
Yeah.
See it all the time out there. And it could be this one thinks it's this and then it's trying to fix this. This one's thinking this one's crazy. Like, what are they doing?
Yeah.
I'm like, they're on a different level altogether. And then we see them just get even worse, even though this one's just trying to help this one.
Yeah.
But they're going the wrong path of what they might need help with.
And it's I think that's where I see so much parallel between leading a team and being an educator,
Mm,
because as an educator, uh, the idea that a student child has trouble doing their maths homework, the idea of you just filling out the answers for them is pretty nonsensical from an educational perspective. They'll have the right answers on their page, and sure, you could mark it, but actually, we've failed the student.
yeah,
From a leadership perspective, though, the same is true. If there's a task that needs to get done and I just do it for them, yes, sure, the task is done, but I've disempowered the person the same way that I would have disempowered the child,
yeah,
and actually set them up for a poorer, experience going forward. So that takes us from empathy and just making people happy to the empathy to say, "Hey, what's going on here? Why aren't they getting this?" Like, and that curiosity. Talk to me about how do you, when you're looking at sort of recruiting educators, right? This is a big job. You're putting people with the students and with kids
mhm,
of other. You're changing lives here.
yeah.
What are some of those traits around? Like, how do you get that balance right between wanting to help them but also not disempower them?
Yeah, yeah, and it's like in a recruitment because I'm educator first, a recruiter second. I know in the recruitment world, a lot of people are coached for interviews, and I don't like overly doing that too much because I find it doesn't help with that side of it. Because again, I now do recruitment. I'm at a desk and a computer, but when people are working with children, like there's this whole other element of the personality you're putting in, not just the staff they're going to work with, but the children, the families, and the knock on to the other stakeholders. But I know as a leader, something I used to do for recruiting and interviewing when people didn't know they were being interviewed, I would invite them into the service at our busiest time. So this is say after school care, 150 children at about 4 o'clock. We like to think of it as organized chaos. We knew what was going on, where everyone was, but to someone coming in, oh wow. So I would get people to come in and just like for an informal chat at that time and purposely stand kind of at the entryway where the most traffic goes in and out. And because I found working with children, didn't matter about the qualifications and everything. I wanted to actually see first what their eyes are doing when they walk in. Like, are they like, oh my gosh, what am I doing here? This place is nuts. They may not suit our team. Doesn't mean they're not a great educator. They just might not suit that team. Um, for me, I went from a small service of 30 to that, and I thought it was magic. But probably the ADHD being like, wow, I love this. um, so, and then I would have a conversation with them near the door. Usually other team members knew what I was doing. Someone would like just casually walk past, initiate conversation, say hi, see what type of reaction we got. If they were happy to actually be like, oh, hi. You always had a child come ask like, who are you? Or there could be a parent actually that just wants to ask me a question. And what we could pick up in these moments, because these are interactions of, um, we had one qualified, bachelor qualified, but when the child asked her something, she ignored the child. Did
Mhm.
not hire that person, did not hire that person, because that just kind of told you a lot. It's almost like it's like on the job train, like seeing how they would handle that environment without
Mhm.
actually being on the job. And then others like just you could tell straight away how they might be with children. Like if they could, especially if their first role in education and they got down to eye level, I was like, oh my gosh, hire them straight away. Like they just know, like
Mhm.
tune for some reason. We often, this is our schoolhouse care, you often have a lot of younger staff coming straight from high school. It's not been that long since they were a child themselves, so that's like that in tune side of it, just naturally still there for some of them. Um, and how they responded waiting if I had to talk to someone, if it bothered them, if they were casual about it. Yeah, it just helped a lot with our hiring practices. We do recommend it to a fair few of our clients. Some I think it's crazy because it just doesn't sound
Mhm.
like what you traditionally do. But there's others that are like, oh my gosh, I wouldn't have thought to do that. And it does help with that whole other side.
Well, I think what it does is as you mentioned, if you're getting canned answers that have been prepared and
Yeah.
rehearsed, you're getting an acted version of this person. But what you're describing is, I want to see them live it. I want to see them, like diving on in, because the reality, particularly in education, is there's not enough people. We need them to
Mhm.
be, we need to be up to speed as quickly as possible, right? And that's always a pretty critical thing. I love that idea, getting down on the level of the children, because
Mhm.
it shows them that you want to connect with them, not to dominate them or stand over them. The other thing that I commonly hear as being one of the most challenging things to deal with in education are parents.
Yeah, we're annoying. So I say that as a parent now.
I agree. Parents are notoriously more challenging to do. So, what are some of the things you think, the role that you see empathy and understanding play in dealing with parents? I
Mm.
can imagine sometimes high level of stress, high frustration, parents asking for things that are potentially unreasonable or unneeded. How do you sort of see, how does that play out?
Oh, and when like if you don't already have good boundaries, those requests just keep going and going and going. I mean, I remember spending a term, it's a bit different now, so this is a few years ago. I drove two kids to and from the centre for a while because the family needed help. But like in hindsight, because I was young, I was just happy to do it. But I'm like, the amount of time that took me and what they could do instead, like there was lots of other options. I was like, why did I do that? But it was like a boundary. There's obviously child protection things now. That's why I said this was a long time ago. I would not suggest that to an educator. But it was just me wanting to help that family. I think whoever drove them usually to school had broken their leg, and I think that's why I was doing it for a whole term. Or lots of random things like that that came up on that boundary side with parents, and I definitely learned over time. I did struggle not being a parent because you would always have those parents go, "You don't understand, you're not a parent." I could when we were talking before about you don't know how someone's going to feel, I would have parents say that to me when I was going through my infertility issues, and that type of reaction you can get from me there. Like I could be the worst boss ever that afternoon, but you have no idea that conversation's just happened. That parent doesn't know that's just happened either. But that's just in that moment. My team though were aware, like they knew what was happening in my world. So if I actually
Mm,
mentioned that to one of them, there was that gosh, we talk about the relationship with children, but there was that relationship with the team,
mm.
of being able to pick up on that. And here's me thinking I'm on another tangent again. Sorry, no,
It's good.
it's the parents. You learn over time, and again, I think it's another miscommunication and communication. So I got to the point again. This is the out of school hours care connected to a primary school. What kids can do in primary school to out of school hours care on the same site could be completely different. But I now learned from going from teaching. I had no idea what they did in our school care, but there's different ratios. Like at lunchtime as a teacher, you might have 250, 300 kids to yourself. If there's 500 kids, there might be two teachers at lunch. In our school care, there's a minimum of one staff to 15 kids. So what you can do, like we could do tree climbing. You may not want to see that as a parent in the playground at lunch, or you may want to. You've got parents complaining on both sides. So for us, we could do that as a supervised activity. Kids loved it. Thankfully got it past each time we changed principals. I had to try and get that back through. Cartwheels. I don't know if they're still banned, but there was a phase of New South Wales is banning cartwheels at every school, and then trying to work that through again because we've got we had some staff that were like qualified gymnastics trained that could physically properly teach the kids how to do it and be there as they do it. Again, not free for all at lunchtime, just going around doing it. Plus, it's a cartwheel. Um, um, so these type of conversations with parents I'd get in early at the kindy orientations,
Mm,
usually around July, the year before these kids start school. So they start learning about the environments being different. So that's the communication side. And we only started doing that over time. You'd remember what to put in next. I remember one great family, but they were surprised when they came that their kindergarten child could play outside. Like to
yeah,
us,
right.
it sounds silly. But for them, because they were so used to whatever early learning they were at, it was heavily indoors or very, you know how some just have a smaller outdoor and it's fence, a high fence. We didn't have a high fence as a school, so they made that assumption the kid won't play outside. But they were furious that they found their kid playing outside. So it's working with that conversation of why. And then it was just a misconception they had in their head based on previous experience, not because anything ever went wrong or we were doing anything wrong, or neither them. I guess their approach could have been a little bit different, but as a parent, I understand sometimes you just go to fear quickly.
I think that's a really important thing, right? Is that when we're dealing with other people, that they'll have a different emotional experience to us in the same situation for a whole bunch of reasons. And I'm sure, you know, your background, other people's backgrounds, they're all so vastly different that my sort of a usual advice is when you've got, say, a parent who's really upset. What I tend to see some people do, or this can be a customer, this can be a peer, it doesn't matter really. When we see someone really upset, we tend to put up defenses and try and combat them rather than going, wow, that's interesting. I wonder what's going on there. I
Yeah,
wonder
and
what's driving that, right? Yeah.
and because my whole push for what I did was always the child first. So for me, having someone annoyed their child's playing outside where there's so many good things that come from that, you automatically, it's not on defensive they said anything, on defensive for the child and the experiences they'll miss out if they've got that perception. Same with when we would get told we couldn't do cartwheel, we couldn't do tree climbing, but I know all the benefits. So there's risk benefits, not just risk assessing is the main thing, but risk benefits too. And it's like advocating for that side of it as well, but learning to give that information along the way. And there's a lot of, we've got the internet, so there's a lot of research out there. There's a lot of like proper articles, like journal articles, so from academics as well, not just a website someone's made that can help back up any of your practices, any of your whys. And even as a leader, like there's also that type of research you can do to help back up why you think you might want to lead a certain way. And go into.
I think you're right that having those conversations early, having them respectfully, having fewer surprises is always good, both in that leadership space and in the education space. Look, Bobby, before we wrap up, I'd love to ask you a few of my empathy card questions. So these are little random questions that we often give out. And the first one is, describe a time when you had to overcome a challenge at work.
Always have ADHD, focusing on one thing.
So maybe let's ask with the ADHD, how do you, like, obviously you've got to get a lot of shit done, right? You got a lot of stuff you got to get done. And you know, you sort of describe that you get very fascinated and go off in tangents or get to absorb. How do you practically deal with that?
I've found that what works for others won't work for me, and just being okay with that. So the diagnosis helps that. Like, say I was about to say for normal people, but no, for people other, because it's different for everyone. Like say I'm looking over there because there's a desk. Sitting there at a desk with a big monitor might be your most productive way to work. No, not for me. I get the most done legit in a car, especially if I'm in the passenger seat. I might, because we live near the beach, luckily, I might go park at the beachfront and just work in the passenger seat with a laptop, no big monitor, nothing to make it easier, but I get more done. Whether it's the distraction side, I'm helping in my brain. So it's just learning what works for you, regardless of ADHD or anything. Everyone's so different on what works. I think with COVID and the working from home, there's an assumption that you get more done at home, not always. There's all these other distractions like, oh, I've still got to do the washing up, or even for me, the focus is a bit different. Home environment. And I found even going to, say, a co-work, where you just go with a fresh desk and a monitor, I get so much more done there. You're still talking to people. It's a great team there where I go locally, but it's not your team. And that's that, working on that, what works for you. And don't feel guilty or this is that the people pleasing side. I always have a habit of saying, I feel bad. Like, I feel bad if things for me don't work the same for other people. Like if everyone likes something or doing something and I don't know why I use that language, but something I'm working on.
Yeah, we have a tendency, don't we, to think that disagreement is negative, but if we all like the same food, for example,
Yeah.
it'd be pretty boring. So it's good
Yeah.
that we have
Yeah.
differences, right?
Yeah.
What country would you really like to visit and why?
Um, I've been lucky to have already traveled, not a lot because some people have been a million, but I'm grateful for anything. I think I was saying the other day there's like a lot like I know my mum hasn't traveled. I don't think my dad has or anything. Um, oh gosh, I sound really simple and just saying I'd love to just go to Fiji next. Like we got married in Hawaii because last minute decision because that's how I roll. 3 months beforehand, like let's go to Hawaii and get married. I've been to Europe, Asia, Thailand like 9 times, but yeah, Fiji I feel like it's my next hit list.
Yeah.
Something simple.
Fiji is beautiful. We were there last year, and I spoke at a conference there. It was great, and I recommend it. I'll tell you
I
some
I
tips.
I would love to speak at a conference in Fiji. I feel like that gets me over there even more. And yeah, I found out I've got family over there that I didn't know about. So my mum was adopted, but ancestry's connected us, but live in Fiji.
Wow.
So that's also a kind of a goal there. And I think kids change where you want to travel. Like it's easy to go, I'm assuming, with 2 kids there, hence it's on my list.
Kids Club. Oh, that's what I'm saying. Kids Club is amazing.
Yeah.
Very last one. How do you define success?
I would like to say being happy. Yeah, definitely being happy, and that'll be different to everyone else, but that's a big goal. And it can look different every day.
Awesome. Barbie, it's been so great chatting to you. I love your energy and your passion, and we've learned so much about the ins and outs. And one thing I'd definitely recommend, if you're a parent listening to this, when you go to pick up your kids from after
Mm.
school care or out of school care, or you're going to pick them up from school, just be a little kinder to that teacher or that carer, because they've probably got a million things they're juggling, and it's a pretty tough job. So thank you so much for what you do.
Yeah, and they're our village. They're fine. They're all our village. So
Absolutely, absolutely.
yeah, thank
Thank you
you.
so much. Have a great afternoon, and good to chat to you.